If I come and I tell you my problems, they are the product of the way that I see things, which is the way that creates the problems in the first place. Everybody says holistic, holistic, holistic. Everybody then zooms into the pain. Then that's not holistic. It's important for therapists to learn certain techniques. But what is more important is to help them connect with human beings. Everybody sort of says, the therapeutic rapport and this and that, and they sort of,
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Welcome to the MedConceptions podcast, a podcast about leading a healthy and more mindful life. Today we have with us Professor Renos Papadopoulos. How are you, Professor?
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we begin, I'm going to say a few words about Professor Renos. Renos Papadopoulos is a professor in the Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies and director of the Centre for Trauma, Asylum and Refugees at the University of Essex, UK. He is a practicing clinical psychologist, family psychotherapist, author, and a Jungian psychoanalyst, as well as a trainer and supervisor. As consultant to the United Nations and other organizations, he has been working with refugees, tortured persons, trafficked people, and other survivors of political violence and disasters in many countries. He lectures and offers specialist trainings internationally, and his writings have appeared in 18 languages. Professor, it's obvious that you have quite the resume. You've worked extensively in psychology and with trauma survivors. Can you share what initially drew you to this field, especially the intersection between psychology and spirituality?
Yes, it's difficult, of course, to summarize everything very briefly, but I ended up working in this field as a result of my personal history, mainly, and my wish to assist and help with people. I was born in Cyprus, as you know. I grew up during the War of Independence against the British colonial powers. And my school years were full of demonstrations against the British, throwing stones and going to, again, in demonstrations, going to the funerals of Greek Cypriot heroes who were killed in the liberation struggle, etc. Then later I worked and I was teaching at the University of Cape Town in South Africa for 10 years during the apartheid era, when the white racist regime was oppressing the black people in South Africa, the African native population. And always I was very sensitive to issues of social justice and but the biggest impetus, so I was involved in South Africa also when I was teaching at the University of Cape Town in community projects for the development of people in black townships around Cape Town. And I was quite tired of all of that. And when I went to Britain in 1980, I wanted to stop with all of that and just be an ordinary psychologist. But then the wars with the cessation of Yugoslavia as a country started. And as I happened to have worked in Yugoslavia before, I was trained in Yugoslavia with a UNESCO scholarship and I spoke some languages there. Then I was possibly, I think, the only British clinical psychologist that spoke fluently Serbo-Croat and had connections, professional connections with psychologists there. And I was involved. The organizations wanted me to help them in Yugoslavia during those wars. And then I came back working in this field. And after that, it developed as a kind of a speciality. What I'm trying to say is that I never consciously wanted to work in this field, but just life circumstances brought me into this. And then after that, I had to basically resign to the fact that, yes, I mean, I could be possibly of some help in this field, so I just accepted to do that. And in all humility, I can also say that in comparison with other colleagues that I saw in the field, I realized that unfortunately, I could have stomach for violence. I mean, I could work well whilst there were sort of bullets flying around me, so to speak, whereas a lot of my colleagues would sort of be scared. And I could understand the predicament of people who were survivors of violence. And then I accepted that, perhaps I could carry on with that. And then slowly it just became a speciality, and people ask me all the time to help with this project or with that project. So that's how I ended up in this. Now, in terms of the spirituality, yes, I throughout this work, I was always struck by the fact that certain people who have a strong sense of spirituality could deal with these upheavals in a more not necessarily easier way, but with a more meaningful way. So I was always struck by that. But again, what is important for us is to understand the meaning of what we say when we talk about spirituality, because a lot of people can just say that they follow certain spirituality. So people who follow superficially some kind of affiliation within a certain religion or spiritual direction, whatever, is not the same as people who know and deeply are engaged in daily practices, etc. So we need to be very careful about using such words as spirituality. What does it mean for every person, and in what way do they use it? I suppose that's what I can say to begin with. Yeah.
Wonderful. That was actually going to be my first question. What do we mean by spirituality? So we've covered that. I'm going to move to my first other question. So how do you see religion and the spiritual practices that you mentioned impacting an individual's mental health? Are there both positive and potentially negative effects?
Well, I will develop further what I started saying earlier, that it depends what we mean by spirituality and what kind of spirituality it is. I suppose the spirituality is connected with some sense of the divine, and the way I see it is in a, I suppose, much more tangible way. Let me take you through my thinking in this way. If a person is experiencing some difficulty in a relationship, in a certain context in life, one of the most meaningful ways of trying to understand what is happening with that person so that they can move on and improve is to try to understand the specific context of that situation. For example, a person tries to say, I don't know, when they're thinking about some difficulties in the families, we try to understand the whole context of the family. Mm-hmm. We try to understand the various relationships from different perspectives. spirituality, in a sense, therefore, can be the way we understand our behavior and relationships in the widest possible context, in terms of not in terms of this family or in terms of this historical context, but what is the meaning of my difficulty now in the context of my very existence? What am I here for?
Yeah.
And these are very difficult questions. And people usually do not ask them directly in this way. But in a sense, spirituality is about an attempt to try to locate oneself in the context of one's existence and in the context of one's not just simply immediate family or country or religion or whatever specific social group, but in relation to fellow human beings and in relation to what is the meaning that I am in this life and relating to these people around me. And for example, if we look at the Orthodox Christian understanding of that, in terms of the creation, in terms of God having a plan for the creation, which means that all of us fit as God's children, everybody, even non-Christians sort of say, our Father who art in heaven. I mean, what is the meaning that he is our Father? What is the meaning of God the Father, of somebody who has created this world and cares for this world? And in what way can we collaborate with each other on earth so that we can make this God's plan a place that is meaningful for all of us, and not just simply looking at my own will or my own ambitions as opposed to my fellow human beings.
Yeah.
So thinking about that wider context of where do I fit in with my fellow human beings and with the creation in general is for me the basic characteristic, I suppose, of spirituality.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it's just simply following some recipes of one ethical system or other, that's not, well, I mean, there are important ethical systems, but that's, I suppose, the way that I understand spirituality in a healthy way.
Yeah.
You also asked about spirituality and mental health. Yes, I would say healthy spirituality definitely improves mental health, and unhealthy spirituality does not. The question, of course, is what is healthy and what is unhealthy spirituality. And we go back to what I was saying earlier about a genuine lived spirituality, that a person is not just simply following some recipes or some ethical systems, which are important. Also, ethical systems are important, but spirituality is about a healthy spirituality that would help a person's mental health, would be a spirituality that takes into consideration a living relationship with God and the creation around us and our fellow human beings.
It seems to me that spirituality, it is quite different for each person in terms of what their goal and what their belief in life is. So you are also a therapist, a psychotherapist. You also see patients. My question is, when a therapist encounters someone who is deeply religious, who is deeply spiritual, how can they respect their beliefs while still trying to help them understand their struggles in a psychological context? For instance, how would you handle a statement of, this happened because it was God's will, without either dismissing or endorsing their worldview? Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. This shows the complexities. This is a very important question, and it shows the complexities. But again, my answer would be in terms of not following recipes, but conveying in a way that the other person can experience a genuine respect for their own individuality, for their own struggle, for their own worldview, in a way that they can actually experience it. Not just simply say, I respect your worldview. And then try to see together in what way it promotes or it does not the human relationships and the well-being of people around them. In other words, if a person uses as an excuse, this was God's will and I need to carry on and this and that, well, obviously, we will try to help that person to try to see the consequences. Again, it's a question of realizing that the spiritual and the religious and the psychological are very, very, very finely defined and very finely connected. And it is not easy to sort of say how we are going to translate the one from the other. It's a question of trying to look at a human being in their totality and convey a genuine respect for their struggles. And in that, try to use constructively their own beliefs. Mm-hmm. I have many examples of working with people who were Muslims, Jews, or Buddhists, or whatever, and using their own belief systems without validating or invalidating them, helping them to connect with something that is more healthier in themselves. You see, I am not here as a therapist to convince somebody of any religion or any path. Mm-hmm. It's important to identify the conflicts that people are feeling and experiencing in themselves in trying to follow their own belief systems in the context of their life experiences. And it's remarkable because in there you can see actually wonderful transformations. People reviewing things in a way that deepen their, revise and deepen and transform their own understanding of themselves and in relation to their lives and God's creation. It's difficult to convey it without going into great examples. Yeah.
Are there any experiences that you remember or a specific patient that you have in mind to show us a bit about maybe what it might seem practically?
Yes, I can give you a
story. Let's say
yes,
that might sound might be
yeah.
easier for it to be understood, I guess, in that way.
Okay. All right. I can mention a person that I worked with, actually it was not just a person, it was a whole family during the war in Kosovo, immediately after the war in Kosovo, who was a very devout Muslim.
Yeah.
And following the death of their son, the whole of the family basically collapsed and they were not functioning.
Yeah.
And everybody was worried about them. And when they asked me to see this family, it was part of a training that we were offering at the time in Kosovo. I spoke with the father and the whole family. And the father had this conviction. He believed that his son was killed because God punished him.
Yeah.
And he kept saying, God punished me, and that's why my son was killed. I must have done something wrong, and God punished me. And the other thing he was saying was that my life came to an end when my son was killed. And first of all, I connected with him. And I connected with him by, first of all, listening to him. And I was just silent for a long time. And he told me about all the details of what happened to his son. And it was just not just enumerating the events, but also it was accompanied by a lot of suffering and a lot of feeling. And he was telling me some very distressing events. And the whole family were crying. And I connected with that very deeply. And they could see that I was always also shaken by that. And in that, we got very close together. They understood that I understood their pain. And I wasn't there to judge them. I understood their pain. And I understood their predicament. I understood the way that they came to that sort of dead end in their lives. Then, actually, you asked me to explain things. I can be very honest with you. I felt totally useless. I thought, what on earth can I do with these people? They lost their wonderful son, and whatever I can do, I cannot bring him back. And I felt that despair and that helplessness myself. But then, as a trained psychoanalyst, I said, now I am now connected with their pain and their despair. So I understood that what I was experiencing, in a sense, was what they were experiencing. And I said, okay, now we can start therapy.
Yeah.
So I experienced my own uselessness, my own helplessness, my own despair. And then I realized that then we were connected deeply. And I wasn't just simply listening to their story and, oh yes, tell me about this, and writing it down.
Yeah.
I was deeply connected with them. From that position of that deep connection with them, I started then not disagreeing with him, but extending his belief system. For example, I started saying to him, yes, you are saying to me that God is punishing you and took your son away and your life has come to an end, but I see that God also kept you alive. And I see that you are a very able man, from what you told me, that he did various things and he planned things in his life and all of that. And I said to him, yes, from what I see, I don't know what God's will is, I don't know, but I can see that God kept you alive. So insofar as he kept you alive and you are very capable and very able person, it seems to me that yes, that was the end of your life so far. So God perhaps intends another phase of your life from now on, because you are a very capable person. So I did not disagree with him, but I extended using his belief.
Yeah.
He accepted that. And that developed beautifully within one session.
Yeah.
Within one session. And by the end, he told me that Allah brought me there to help him move on with his life, etc., etc., etc. He never asked me whether I was a Christian, a Jew, or a Buddhist, or an atheist, or anything.
Yeah.
He felt that I was deeply connected with his belief. Where, he did not assume that I was a Muslim or anything, but what I did there helped him to move on with his own deeper spirituality, in a sense. And not only things changed with him and with his family, but actually his whole community around him sensed the development in him, and they collected money and they sent him for Hajj, for pilgrimage in Mecca, and he came back and he had even a deeper respect from his community.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that ability to connect deeply in a humble way with a person in front of us, a suffering person. And if we manage to put away our own expertise as experts, and we know tricks and techniques and all of that, but connect humanly and with humility, there is one example that comes to my mind that this worked, and I can give you many more other examples of this nature, where genuine transformation can take place and people can move on with their lives. And there, he didn't ask, I didn't tell him that you are right or you are wrong.
Yeah. You mentioned your part in using humility. Why is it important to have humility when dealing with such situations?
With my trainees, I always try to help them understand what we are experts about. What is our expertise about? It's important for therapists to learn certain techniques. But what is more important is to help them connect with human beings. Everybody sort of says therapeutic rapport and this and that, and they sort of, how does that happen? Or people have all sorts of other terminology, compassion, relationship, and all of that. For me, that's the key thing. Because if people cannot do that, once there is no human connection at that deep level, nothing can happen. And humility for me there is crucial. Because if I that's why I explained to you almost the phases that I went through myself. If I'm there as an expert and I'm listening to the case and I'm talking about them as case and not as a human being.
As a number, case number
as
one.
Etc., etc. How am I going to connect with them? By allowing myself to go deeply and listen to them, not just listen, but connect with their pain, with their despair, with their anger, with their hopelessness, and all of that. In order to do that, you need humility. Because if you are there and listening as a specialist, you're not going to listen any of this. You're going to say, oh yes, I know that's the symptom, that's that symptom, and that's that. You're not connecting with the human being.
Yeah.
So humility, what is humility? Humility comes from the Latin word humus, which means soil. You need to connect with the soil. You need to be humbled, touching the soil. You need to be, start from there.
Yeah.
I remember, Saint Sophrony of the monastery at Essex. Even in confession, he was always saying, we hear that from our elder Gerondas Zacharias from Essex. He always used to say that when you sit in confession, you need to sit lower than the other person.
Yeah.
You need to connect with their pain. You're not there in judgment. So, in a similar way, for me, in any kind of therapeutic encounter, humility is the essence. Without that, the human connection cannot happen. And then other techniques, yes, of course, people can pontificate and sort of say, do this and do that, and give various interpretations and fancy language and all of that. It doesn't work. It works a little bit, but people forget about it. But there is no substantial transformation in the way that I have mentioned it.
Yeah, that was really wonderfully put. Thank you for that. Now I'll try to shift this a bit on a spiritual practice about praying. So, what exactly do we mean by saying that someone prays?
Well, first of all, I'm not a theologian and I'm not a spiritual guide to anybody. You should ask that question to the right people. But the way I understand prayer from my perspective as a psychotherapist or as is what I read and what I hear from people who know about these things is an opening up of their heart to God, to try to see themselves not from the usual perspective that we look at ourselves. This is really quite important, quite crucial. Usually when people are talking about their difficulties, they understand themselves as a fixed entity, and they follow a certain way of understanding themselves.
Yeah.
For me, any transformation, really, especially substantial transformation, comes the moment they begin to reformulate the question in the first place. Let me take you through a couple of different routes to come to this.
Mm-hmm.
One is this. The way I perceive things, for example, I have a problem with my colleague, with my spouse, with my job, with my neighbor, whatever. And I'm going to a psychologist to find me a solution. Mm-hmm. So the way I perceive that, and I tell that the psychologist or the father confessor, is from my perspective. But that is the perspective that creates the problem in the first place. So I'm very sensitive to the word Metania. In Hebrew is teshuvah. Very briefly, I'll speak about teshuvah and Metania in relation to answering your question.
Yeah.
Teshuvah means turning. Means turning back to realize that God has been looking at me. In other words, that I am not just lost and I'm doing my own thing and I'm lost, but actually God has been looking at me, has been watching me, has been caring for me. The moment I turn back, Teshuvah is turning. And there is a lot in the Orthodox services about turning. Μην αποστρέψεις το πρόσωπον σου. We're asking God not to turn his face away from us, but also we try not to turn our own face away from God. But if anything, to turn our face back to realize, so Teshuvah means I don't carry on walking along my way, but I turn back and I see, oh, which way is God intending me to go?
Yeah.
Which means, going back to what I was saying earlier, if I come and I tell you my problems, they are the product of the way that I see things, which is the way that creates the problems in the first place. So what is needed is some translation of that. I need to see it from a different perspective. Usually psychologists create the different perspective by putting that problem according to their own psychological theory, which is a different perspective, a little bit, and shakes me out of alignment. It moves me away from the usual way that I'm fixed in looking at my own problem. And that can be helpful a little bit. Prayer can help me to shift myself completely and debase me, move me away from my own ego, from my own way of looking at myself. In other words, another way of putting at it, develop a new epistemology. Start looking at myself from a different perspective. For example, if I tell you about my problems with my neighbor, with my spouse, with my job, with my this, with my that, the question is, I am looking at it from my own perspective. Mm-hmm. If I were to try to see, well, from their perspective, what is it that I do to contribute to the creation of that difficulty, then things begin to shift.
Yeah.
So I begin to shift things the moment I see it from a different perspective. I change my epistemology. I change the way that I formulate my understanding of the problem. So the question is not how to solve my problem in the way that I define it, but to change the formulation of my problem.
Yeah.
And prayer can, at its best, helps me to do that. Instead of trying to change everybody to fit in according to my wishes, for example, Saint Sophrony is saying about praying for our enemies.
Yeah.
That is a total transformation of my position. If I pray for my enemies, it's no longer my enemy.
Yeah.
I can try to understand the way that they are also struggling with life, and I'm also struggling with life, and we're brothers, and we're God's children. So I can see prayer, the reformulation of epistemology of the definition of our problems, and the Metania. Metania is not just change of the way I think about things. Nous, according to the Church Fathers, is the totality of the human faculties that make a human being human.
Yeah.
It's the heart, it's the brain, it's the thinking, it's everything. It's the totality.
We're back after a small technical difficulty. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I was talking about Metania and the real meaning of Metania, which is a total transformation of a human being. It's not just simply repentance. Oh, I've done something wrong. Sorry, I repent.
Yeah.
We're talking about a total transformation, and that's why I'm remembering the teshuvah. In other words, to to turn my head, to realize that God has been attending to me, and try to align myself, not with my own direction, but to stop, turn back, and not continue with my own direction, but continue with the direction that God was intending for me.
Yeah.
And Metania is the process of changing my whole perception of myself and my difficulties. Not just simply defining my difficulty and asking for a solution, but reformulating my definition of the problem in a way that, we would call epistemology of my symptom.
Yeah.
How do I know? Epistemology is the knowledge. It's how I know that I know. It's about knowledge. So the first step, or the most important step, is gently the therapist to help the person, as we said, with proper human connection and humility, to invite them gently, slowly to begin to question the very foundations of what they were asking, of the problem that they were presenting, and try to see it from a different perspective. Not only what can I do when that other person is not good for me and I have a problem with them, but in what way have I been contributing to that, for example. I mean, that's a very simple way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Not only what can I do to change him, but also in what way have I been contributing to that. That changes the perspective. That's a tangible way of looking at that. And then in the same way, we can extend that in terms of what has been in my contribution, in what way have I been contributing to create conditions that create the problems that I perceive as problems. Now that's quite a radical transformation. And that is the way where I see that both prayer, Metania, Teshuvah, meet together in helping a person to view themselves from a different perspective, from a wider perspective, from a most fundamental perspective, the fundamental perspective of our own life. Why are we here?
Yeah.
And what is our purpose? If we don't put that in that wider context, but that doesn't mean that necessarily we need to need logical answers to all of those things, but connect with those deeper questions. And then that is possible for people to begin to transform. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want us to shift our conversation to another topic that I want to touch upon. So in your last book called Involuntary Dislocation, you talk a lot about adversity-activated development. So could you elaborate on the concept of adversity-activated development? How might someone unfamiliar with this idea be able to recognize it in their own life or in the lives of someone else who has experienced trauma?
Yeah. Yes. In fact, this is very related to what we were saying earlier. But let me explain a little bit better. Let us move into that. Adversity-activated development is exactly what the word says. Is the development that emerges, that is activated from when people are exposed to adversity. Whenever we're exposed to adversity, the first impression we have, the first response we have, is the pain, the losses, the suffering that we experience from being exposed to that adversity. Whether that adversity is, personal misfortune or war or natural disaster or whatever, all of these things are forms of adversity. And there are personal adversities, there are collective adversities. For example, wars or natural disasters are collective forms of adversities. And adversity comes from the Latin adversus, against the turn, which is when things do not turn out the way we expect them.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, a person gets into their car to go to work and then they have an accident. That's not expected. That's an adversity. So, as I said, usually, immediately we look at the trauma, the suffering, the losses, the pain that is involved in this situation. And that is so. That is one part of the consequences. However, that's not everything. That's not everything. Because if we work seriously in this field, we realize that people, however badly they are affected negatively, however many losses they have incurred, how much suffering they have, they always retain some strengths from their previous lives, from their before the adversity started. And this could be anything. And this is what I call resilient features. People are talking about developing resilience. That's another story. Resilience, according to, again, to the original meaning of the word, is the capacity of a body to retain its own functioning despite being exposed to adversity.
Yeah.
I don't know. In other words, this pen is writing. If I go like this, it still writes, means that this pen is resilient to that adversity. Yeah. But if I go like this, it may not be resilient. So if it continues to function in the way that it used to function before, means it's resilient to that adversity.
Yeah.
And usually we don't think about that, because when people are exposed to adversity, they are, in a sense, screaming, literally and metaphorically, from their own pain. And they're saying, oh, please come and help me with my pain. And everybody looks at the pain, which we should.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we should not forget, if we're really working holistically, everybody says holistic, but everybody then zooms into the pain. Then that's not holistic. Yeah. Holistic is to look at the totality of a human being. And in addition to the pain, every human being also has certain features, positive features that they had before, certain strengths that continue. For example, their capacity to attend to their children, or to look after their elderly parents, or to care for people, or to cook, or whatever. So it doesn't really matter what it is. But if we look at the person and we see, yes, they have suffered certain losses and they are experiencing painful, they are in pain and distress, but also they have certain strengths. And then we move into the third dimension, which is, what have they gained from their experience of being through that adversity? Mm-hmm. Let's be reminded, in all languages and in all traditions and in all cultures, there are variations of the saying, whatever does not kill you strengthens you.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. That's why they exist in all of this, because it's a fact. It's a fact. So what does that mean? That means that specifically because they have been exposed to that adversity, now that experience had an impact on them, has changed them in some way. If you work with traumatized people in all of these contexts, and I've worked in 40 different countries over the years, for more than half a century, if you create space, people will tell you about their pain, their trauma and all of that. But also at some stage they will say things like this: because I was so close to death, doctor, now I'm wondering what to do. I wonder whether I should continue, I don't know, work so many hours a day and neglect my family. And now I value human relationships in ways that previously I didn't value. And you see, I don't know, company directors, after being exposed to severe forms of adversity, volunteering in local community centers to help others. They never used to do that before.
Yeah.
Adversity-activated development is the inevitable set of changes that happen when people are exposed to adversity. People see themselves in a different context. People are shaken to the core of their beings by these adversities, and they begin to look at themselves in a different way. So in a sense, it's a kind, adversity can almost, dare I say, bring some kind of metania in a person. In other words, a reviewing of themselves, a change of mind of before they may have thought that I was a very omnipotent person, I could do this. After the adversity, they realized, my goodness, they were petrified, they lost so much, they came so close to death. Now they say, well, what shall I do for the rest of my life? Now, that questioning, what shall I do for the rest of my life? In what way shall I continue life? That is a gain. And hopefully people can use that positively and not to say, okay, let's drink and have a merry life and forget about it because I'm going to die.
Yeah.
A lot of people actually see that they are radically changed by that. And that is what adversity-activated development. All the changes that happen as a result of the experience of being exposed to adversity. And usually, obviously, the people themselves forget about that, but also therapists or people who are trying to help them forget about that because they're focusing only on helping them with the problems. And they forget the gains that they themselves developed. Because as experts, they want the gains that the person develops to be a product of their own expertise, rather than the product of the process of transformation that the person undergoes themselves. The teshuvah, the metania.
Yeah.
So that is the essence of adversity-activated development. And from my experience, every human being has that development.
First of all, I want to say I have so many more questions. I feel like we can talk for another 6 or 7 hours or so, but unfortunately, we don't have the time for today. Thank you, Professor, again, so much for coming. It's been truly an honor to have you on the show. I really do hope that this conversation was able to shed just a little bit of light on some of the misconceptions that exist around spirituality and psychology. And hopefully our audience has found it helpful. Thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I wish you all the very best with your podcasts.
Thank you. Thank you so much.